Straight ahead on Law & Crime Daily. 5 first responders now charged in the death of Elijah McClain. A Colorado grand jury returning a 32-count indictment 2 years after the 23-year-old was killed.
Our goal is to seek justice for Elijah McClain.
And R. Kelly's 6th accuser takes the stand. Another woman tells the jury she too was infected with herpes by the R&B singer. Plus, both sides rest in the Robert Durst murder trial. The back and forth questioning of the real estate heir accused of killing his best friend.
Nothing further.
Law & Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law & Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. We begin with a major announcement out of Colorado in the investigation into the death of Elijah McClain. A grand jury has returned a 32-count indictment against 2 police officers, 1 former police officer, and 2 fire department paramedics. Elijah McClain died 2 years ago after being placed in a chokehold by officers, then sedated by paramedics. He was just 23 years old. Police body cam video captured paramedics administering 500 milligrams of ketamine. McClain yelled he was an introvert, that he was different, and begged for help. Earlier this year, an independent investigation found there wasn't much that was done properly when Elijah McClain was stopped. And it also found the police investigation into the use of force was flawed. Now, a grand jury is finding the actions of those first responders criminal.
Late last Thursday, after careful and thoughtful deliberation, the grand jury returned a 32-count indictment against Aurora police officers Randy Rodima and Nathan Woodard, former Aurora police officer Jason Rosenblatt, and Aurora Fire Rescue paramedics Jeremy Cooper and Peter Jakuniak for their alleged conduct on the night of August 24, 2019, that resulted in the death of Mr. McClain.
Each of the defendants face 1 count of manslaughter and criminal negligent homicide. They also face a slew of different charges, including second-degree assault and crimes of violence. Colorado's Attorney General says the paramedics will face specific charges for administering ketamine without consent.
Paramedics Cooper and Jakuniak also face 1 count, second-degree assault with intent to cause bodily injury and cause bodily injury. 1 count, second-degree assault for recklessly causing serious bodily injury by means of a deadly weapon, ketamine. 1 count, second-degree assault for a purpose other than lawful medical or therapeutic treatment, intentionally causing stupor, unconsciousness, or other physical or mental impairment or injury to Mr. McClain by administering a drug, ketamine, without consent.
I spoke to the McClain family attorney after they filed a wrongful death lawsuit, wanting to know why those first responders administered ketamine.
He did not have supernatural strength, as you can see from the video. He is completely restrained under a pile of law enforcement officers. By the testimony of the officers, about 700 pounds worth of cops were on top of this 140-pound man who was begging for his life and saying that he couldn't breathe. So he certainly didn't exhibit that. He was responding appropriately. He was identifying himself. He was saying his name, that he was trying to go home, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he didn't have a weapon, and they still administered this drug, which was medically totally inappropriate. And that was a constitutional violation of his right to bodily integrity. We cannot legally be given medication against our will, and that's what happened here.
Joining us today is the co-founder and executive director of Partners for Justice, Emily Galvan-Almanza and Terry Austin. Emily, for 2 years, I think we all but gave up hope there would be charges here. What does the indictment tell you about how the Attorney General is prosecuting this case, and do they give you hope for justice?
I think if anything, what this case displays is the failings of the local law enforcement mechanisms here. And I don't just mean the police, who did literally everything wrong in their contact with Elijah McClain, whose case remains just staggeringly painful to think about. However, the reason the Attorney General had to take this out of the DA's hands is because at the outset, the DA and the cops did a really bad job investigating themselves. And what happened when they did a really bad job investigating themselves and they got a forensic report that said, we don't know why Elijah McClain died. Couldn't have had anything to do with the 700 pounds of cops on top of him or the massive dose of ketamine he was given. That investigation was fundamentally unfair and flawed. So the fact that the state took that away from local enforcement and convened its own grand jury, and the people of the state of Colorado said, this is a crime. That's a significant change from what we've seen years ago when grand juries indict a ham sandwich.
Absolutely. Now, Terry, it's not just the charges. There also seems to be a civil rights pattern and practice investigation, which I think Emily is somewhat hinting at, into the Aurora PD and the fire department. What does that mean?
Well, the difference with this is a pattern and practice investigation is going to look at what the entire police department or fire department is doing here. And in this case, it's not going to just focus on an individual person, but it's going to focus on what all of the officers are doing. And so it's to protect individuals and to protect their constitutional rights. And in fact, if it is determined that the constitutional rights of individuals like Elijah McClain violated, then you could see changes in policies and practices and basically changes in the way the police and the fire department actually arrest individuals and actually help individuals.
Absolutely. Looks like they're looking at this at a very granular level, but also at a bigger picture. And of course, we'll give you those updates in the Elijah McClain case as they continue. Turning now to more top legal news, a Wisconsin man accused of killing and dismembering his parents returns to court. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with what happened.
Brian, we've been following Chandler Halderson's case, and he has entered a not guilty plea to the murders of his mother and father. Now, you may recall Bart and Krista Halderson disappeared over the July 4th weekend. Their son Chandler reported them missing on July 7th near Madison, Wisconsin. But sheriff's officials there say his story was suspicious. He then asked for a lawyer and didn't talk with the investigators anymore. Now, the sheriff of Dane County told me there's a photo of Chandler Halderson in the area where part of Bart Halderson's remains were located, and remains identified as his mother, Krista, were also found. Halderson remains in jail in Madison, Wisconsin. He'll be back in court in October, and then his trial is scheduled to begin in January of 2022. Brian.
Thanks, Anjanette. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, Britney Spears' lawyers calls for her father to immediately step down from her conservatorship. But first, another woman says R. Kelly exposed her to herpes. The shocking testimony at the R&B singer's sex trafficking trial. Our legal analysis next.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law&Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law&Crime network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law&Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law&Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back. Testimony in the R. Kelly racketeering trial is continuing with the sixth accuser, Faith, testifying against the disgraced king of R&B. Faith, who testified only with her first name, told the jury about how she contracted herpes from Kelly. She recalled their first sexual encounter where she asked if he was going to use a condom, and he said, quote, "We don't need a condom." Faith was the first accuser to testify. She was not a minor when her 11th month sexual relationship with R. Kelly began. She was 19 when she met him at his concert in Texas in 2017. Faith described cold symptoms in 2018, shortly after her relationship with Kelly ended, followed by bumps all over her mouth. She was shocked when she went to the doctor and was diagnosed with type 1 herpes. Faith tried to get a hold of Kelly, but he did not return her calls or texts. After getting a lawyer in Texas, Kelly messaged her, and when asked why he did not tell her that he had herpes, Kelly allegedly said, quote, "I don't know what you're talking about, but if I did know what you were talking about, we're not going to have this conversation over the phone." Faith also told the jury about a time R. Kelly kept a gun by the bed while forcing her to give oral sex. Faith was the second accuser to testify about contracting herpes from Kelly, and Kelly's longtime doctor, Chris McGrath, had already testified that Kelly was being treated for herpes since 2007. Kelly has been mostly unresponsive to the testimony in the trial so far, his face hidden behind a mask, but for the first time he shaked his head, rubbed his forehead, and seemed unsettled as Faith testified about a sexual encounter where she clenched up to avoid having sex with him. Back to break down the latest in the R. Kelly trial is co-founder and executive director of Partners for Justice, Emily Galvan-Almanza, and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, Faith met Kelly in the same circumstances as some of the other accusers. Is the enterprise in the RICO charge being made out, or will that come later?
I definitely think that the enterprise is being made out here. It supports the claim of the RICO charge. So for the enterprise to be working here, it's supporting his music, his brand, and his sexual activity. And Faith testified that Kelly paid for her flights, he paid for her hotel rooms, and then he forced her to have sex. He demanded sex for her. So even though she's 19 and she was an adult at the time, her testimony is definitely supporting the fact that he had this enterprise and she was swept up as part of that enterprise.
Now, Emily, what does this level of corroboration from the witness about meeting Kelly, his treatment of them, and contracting herpes mean for the defense? Is this case all but done for them?
Well, there's a lot of problems the defense has to overcome in this case. But I think it's actually interesting the degree to which the media right now has focused on a sexually transmissible illness. There's a lot of hesitation when it comes to things like this because so often things that may be gratifying when applied against a really notorious alleged bad actor will then in the future be applied dramatically unfairly against people who are disempowered. So for example, in my practice as a public defender, I would often see people who were, HIV positive being targeted by police for things that would not be a crime for anybody else. His spittle flew in my direction. People using illness or a diagnosis to stigmatize and create new crimes for certain people. I worry a lot about that here, and I don't think the defense is worried about the implications of what this herpes issue or the attention it's being given does in the case or for criminal legal policy more broadly. But I do have concerns about how this case could be extrapolated to less powerful people.
Absolutely, there's a constant concern, I think, that comes from a lot of these major cases where you're talking about R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, or Bill Cosby. Yes, you go after those individuals that you truly believe are bad, but the implications that could apply to others is definitely a concept that I think many people forget in these big major cases. Thank you for bringing that up. Now to more top legal news. Britney Spears' lawyer is calling for her father's immediate resignation from her conservatorship. The pop star's father has been the conservator of her estate for over 13 years. However, in two separate court hearings this summer, Britney Spears described the arrangement as abusive. After a long legal battle, Jamie Spears officially agreed to step down, but on his own time. Now, attorneys for the toxic singer are calling for his immediate resignation without the $2 million payout he's requesting to cover legal and management fees. The next hearing is scheduled for September 29th. Now to more on the doomsday duo Chad and Lori Daybell. Chad's children are speaking out in a new interview with CBS's 48 Hours and are pointing the finger at Lori, saying the reason the bodies of her two children were found in Chad's backyard must be because he's being framed.
I don't know, but I do know that if he were to commit a crime, he wouldn't be foolish enough to put the evidence in his own backyard.
He knew how to dig graves. And that just doesn't sound believable to me.
He was framed.
It all goes back to this woman, says Emma, her father's new wife, Lori Vallow Daybell.
I think he was fooled in the worst, most deadly way possible.
You can watch the entire interview on CBS's Paramount+. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a neighbor's testimony that could point the finger at another suspect in Ohio v. Stanley Ford. Plus, jury selection in the trial of former Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes. The questions potential jurors are being asked after the break. Welcome back. Jury selection in Elizabeth Holmes' federal trial is in its second day. The former Theranos CEO was back in court as dozens of potential jurors face more rounds of questioning. Potential jurors are being asked if they've seen any of the documentaries or podcasts about Elizabeth Holmes. Holmes is facing a dozen fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud charges related to her now defunct blood testing startup, Theranos. Nearly 200 prospective jurors filled out a questionnaire before coming to court. About half indicated they already consumed some media about the case. Holmes is pleading not guilty, and opening statements are expected next week. She faces up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Switching gears to Ohio, where Stanley Ford stands trial, accused of setting deadly fires in his Akron neighborhood. 3 fires, 9 fatalities, 29 charges. The accusation Stanley Ford is facing in court. Ford's trial originally started last year, but the pandemic forced a mistrial. The trial has now restarted, and if Ford is convicted, he could face the death penalty. Neighbors and friends of the victims have taken the stand, testifying about what they know about Stanley Ford and other people who frequent in the neighborhood. Prosecutors called neighbor Beverly Ewing virtually, and both sides questioned her about a stranger who took a particular interest in the fire that occurred at victim Lindell Lewis's home.
So we know it wasn't Stanley Ford, correct?
That's correct.
That black man, when he got out of that vehicle, had a big smile on his face, did he not?
Yes.
And he was very interested in what had just occurred in the neighborhood, was he not?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Objection.
Overruled. He wanted to know what had happened in the area, and he said it looks like a fire, and then he said, well, he kind of laughed with a big smile on his face and said, you know how it is, black people kill their own black people.
The fire investigator, coincidentally a friend of victim Lindell Lewis, then took the stand. He gave an overview of the conversation he had with the defendant during the investigation.
Stanley said that Lindell was a vicious guy, that he had people hanging out on the porch with him, making fun of people come by, verbally attacking them.
When we come back, Durst's intense cross-examination finally comes to an end after 9 days. We'll redirect, straighten out Durst's story, find out next. Welcome back. Big news out of California and the murder trial of Robert Durst. Both sides have now rested, saying they presented all of their evidence. Robert Durst is on trial for the murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. Durst was on the stand for nearly 3 weeks, over half of it under a grueling cross-examination by prosecutor John Lewin. Lewin worked to establish that Durst cannot be a credible witness, given his track record to lie and come up with stories on the stand. This also includes lies that he apparently told to Andrew Jarecki, the director of the Jinx docuseries. Prosecutor Lewin said he planned to call Jarecki in a rebuttal case, but decided against it. Lewin wrapped up his questioning by highlighting what he calls Durst's affinity for lying.
Mr. Durst, this is my last question. As you sit here right now, I'm going to ask you, did you kill Susan Berman?
No.
But if you had, you would lie about it, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Thank you.
In a comparatively quick redirect, Dick DeGuerin questioned the real estate heir about his relationship with Kathy and Susan.
Even though you had problems, did you still love Kathy?
Yeah.
Have you ever loved anybody in your life more than Kathy?
No.
Did you kill her?
No. I was closer to Susan than anybody, with the exception of Kathy. Susan was a friend. I had other friends. But none of my other friendships were like my friendship with Susan.
Did you kill Susan?
No.
Do you know who did?
No.
Then, in recross, Lewin brought up the jailhouse phone call between Durst and his current wife, where it sounds like he's confessing to the murder of his first wife, Kathy.
And Mr. Durst, do you in any way respond to your wife, well, I didn't get rid of Kathy, I didn't kill her, Douglas couldn't have helped me because I didn't have anything to do with it? Do you say any of those things?
No.
In fact, your response, Mr. Durst, is to say, depending on how things go, you might confirm that's what happened, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Durst, please explain how that is anything other than a confession to you having disposed of your wife's body.
is not a confession of me having disposed of my wife's body.
Emily, this may have been a long examination of Durst for all of us, but according to Law and Crime's people in the courtroom, the jury have been attentive and taking notes the entire time. Does this spell disaster for Durst?
I never put too much stock in juror notes, not the notes they send back to the court, not the notes they take. For all you know, someone was drawing a cartoon during that 3-week examination. I wouldn't blame them, because if you as a lawyer take up that much of a jury's time without some really non-repetitive, riveting material, the jury's going to get distracted. I would say that there are certain moments in that examination and in the demeanor of Mr. Durst that absolutely would give me great concern as his defense lawyer. But the jury taking notes, I wouldn't read too much into that. All juries take notes or amuse themselves with the only tool they've got, which is their notebook and their pen.
Gotcha. So maybe it's a few pictures in the margins, maybe it's notes, we'll never know, but can't read too much into it. I would fully agree with that. Terry, there was a lot of back and forth about Andrew Jarecki, the producer of Jinx, testifying. He's not. Why is that?
There was a lot of going back and forth. Lewin wanted Jarecki to testify because he wanted him to refute Durst's claim that Jarecki told him to say what he said and made him look like a bad guy for the film. But at the end of the day, you know, they stipulated that Jarecki would testify about certain issues, and that was because they were protecting the journalistic rights. And ultimately, the defense said, no, I want to do more than that. I want to cross Jarecki. I want to show his bias. I want to show his motivation. And they went back and forth a lot, and judge actually said, look, you've already shown that Durst is lying. And at the end of the day, Lewin agreed. He'd already done a good enough cross-examination on Durst. He didn't need to call Jarecki as a rebuttal witness. And so they just decided, no, he's not coming in to testify.
Interesting. Has Lewin learned that less is more? Didn't think it was going to happen, but thank you both. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.